Why did they let all those people in? Why did the cops just kind of open the doors, lift up the ropes? Have those cops been charged? What was that anyway? That's on tape, it happened.
He could stop this. He could stop it.
At least one person over here is being injured and taken away.
Capitol Hill.
The decision was made at the highest levels of government to hunt down anyone who was at the Capitol on January 6th.
If you see what Tucker Carlson is doing right now on Fox News, the documentary I did basically comes to the same conclusions. And we show you a lot more, in fact.
January 6th demands a full and impartial investigation.
Greetings, everyone. May I please invite you to take your seats? We need to get started with the program. We have a fairly hard stop at 3:30, so please find an open seat. There are plenty of seats over here on the far right of me. That's not a political statement here. I know we're in a political room. Just directions. Okay. So, welcome to the East-West Center's Indo-Pacific Outlook program. We have an absolutely terrific lineup of very well-experienced, high-level former officials. But I just want to, first of all, introduce myself. My name is Satula May. I'm the Vice President of the Center, and I'm delighted to welcome you here on behalf of our President and our Board of Governors, some of whom you will hear from momentarily. But just a couple of ground rules for the run of show today and for the program. Our East-West Center panelists will be speaking, of course, in their private capacities. They've all held high-level government jobs and or other arrangements. You have the full background in your bios, but just to remind you that they are indeed speaking in their private and personal capacities. But there are all four of them today are serving on the East-West Center Board of Governors, which, if you don't know, is appointed by a combination of the Governor of Hawaii and the Secretary of State of the United States, and also includes board membership from the region which the board selects. The second kind of ground rule to know is today we have, unfortunately, Senator Heine, who's speaking on the Pacific Islands, could not join us in person. So we have video remarks that we will show as the second speaker, but we have Governor Waihe here, and he is going to take some questions or field some comments in that Q&A portion. So those are simply my welcoming and logistical remarks. There'll be some small refreshments served, I gather, through the course of the program. But let me move straight away to the program given the short time. First and foremost, it gives me great honor and pleasure to introduce our president of the East-West Center, Suzanne Veras-Lum, retired Major General from the U.S. Army, and is now on 16 months as president of the East-West Center, and we're delighted to have you in Washington. Susie, please.
Thank you, Satu, and good afternoon, or aloha, as we would say in Hawaii. Thank you so much, and Representative Tokuda, thank you for being here. on your very busy schedule, as well as all of our those staffers and the young professionals who are here today, and those of you who are join us online, welcome. And I'm really grateful on behalf of all of our staff and Dr. Jim Scott, who is our board chair, and our board of governors who've come all over, and as far away as from Indonesia, Chris Cantor, who's come, and many of us from Hawaii, and those of who are here or in Colorado. So it's very exciting. I don't want to take too much time, but I do want to bring up. So you'll notice the governor, we don't have a sign because he's an agile leader, able to fill in whenever we need him. Yes, he is. And he was the 4th governor of the state of Hawaii from 1986 to 1994. So I know him well. He was my governor when I was in high school. But it was wonderful, though. And we're so honored that he would be here to make a few remarks on behalf of the Hawaii State Governor, the current governor, Josh Green. But he has a lot of experience in the Pacific, so sitting in for President or Senator Hilda Heine is very appropriate. He knows many of the key players in the Pacific with his vast experience. And he is also the first American of Native Hawaiian descent to serve as a governor of any state of the United States. So with that, Governor, I will turn it over to you to make some opening remarks.
Aloha. It's a privilege to be with you this afternoon. It's such a lovely Hawaiian day. I had to mention that because we still do tourism in Hawaii. Come and visit us. Anyway, the reason why I'm here today is because the state, Hawaii became a state largely as a result of many people who were committed to making sure that what America stood for reached the Pacific. And many of the people that took place in that were members of the 442nd and the 100 Battalion, were Nisei soldiers whose families were being discriminated against here and elsewhere at the same time that they went to fought for America. So we got together in 1960, and a vision grew out of that, beginning with President Eisenhower and some of those early leaders, that Hawaii ought to be doing something special to demonstrate that we, as the leaders of democracy in the Pacific, would have an institution dedicated to training the leaders of that area. Hence began the East-West Center. And the East-West Center actually became an arrangement between President Johnson and Governor Burns, who was the 2nd governor of Hawaii, to create an institution that would have 3 parts to it. 5 members appointed by the state of Hawaii, 5 members appointed by the Secretary of State, and 5 members jointly appointed by both of those groups coming from the international community. This was the beginning of our institution, and we are here, first of all, to express our appreciation for the support that Congress has given us all these many years so that we can carry out that mission. And secondly, to assure you that our continuing commitment to training leaders that understand the importance of democracy, free trade, and a region that builds on the very principles of this nation exists. And so thank you for joining us. I would like at this time to introduce you to a product of the East-West Center, who is also a member of the House of Representatives in the state legislature in Hawaii. I confess that he and I don't always see identically on issues, he being from the other party, but we are totally committed to this mission. So join me in welcoming Representative Gene Ward.
Thank you, Gov. That was very kind of you. I'll get back at you later. I have 2 minutes only. The Gov got 4 and et cetera, but I have 2 minutes to tell you about 2 things. One is that the East-West Center is a game changer, and that's part of what this panel is about. And number 2, probably as importantly, it's a game changer for me personally. That's about head and heart. First of all, in terms of the head, at the East West Center as an alumni, I was a PhD student. I got a PhD in economic sociology, entrepreneurship. But most importantly, I spent my time talking with the Indonesians, the Malaysians, and the Indians to really know what the heart and mind and thinking and culture and basic political ideology, geopolitical ideology. Sometimes, of course, we stayed up all night, too tired to do anything about anything in the morning. But we learned to understand each other. In terms of what affected the heart, knowing other people was one thing, but then meeting and falling in love with a woman from another country was another thing. Like President Obama's parents met at the Japanese garden, I too met a Malaysian, the love of my life, Farida, and we've been married many, many decades. So it's not unusual that you have these things occur. That's not what we're promoting, because we promote leadership and game changers. And that's what the second thing I wanted to tell you about being the East West Center. The East West Center has 68,000 ambassadors throughout the world, 68,000 people who I could not attempt to speak on their behalf. But we are heads of states. There's 6 heads of states, right, President Susie? From the Pacific alone, 6 heads of states. There's a few odd ones like me in the legislature. There's a lot of professors and a lot of business people like Pat Chris. And with that, we have a better understanding of what's going on in the Pacific. And I like to summarize the East West Center as this. We are the PICO. Do all you know what PICO is? The belly button or the center. We are the PICO, the epicenter of soft power in the Pacific. And if there's anything that's needed now more than anything is soft power. The second thing is that we are in the relationship building business. We call it leadership, we call it training, but we're in the relationship building business. And there's no other way to summarize what the East West Center is able to do in terms of changing the heart, changing the mind, is the Indonesian proverb, the pepatah. It goes like this. Tak kenal maka tak sayang. Who and what you don't know, you cannot love. The East West Center brings them together. Not that we love each other, but now we understand each other. And your being here today is greatly appreciated. Thank you and aloha.
So we're now going to the program for our panelists as advertised, and we just have a terrific lineup. Please look at their full bios that were provided for you for this invitation. But first I have the pleasure to introduce our former ambassador at the UN, Kelly Curry.
Thank you.
Yeah,
okay, all right, there we go. I hope that's coming through online with our virtual audience, and thank you all who are here in the room. It's a wonderful turnout. I have the curse and the pleasure of speaking about one of the most diverse sub-regions of the Indo-Pacific, Southeast Asia, which is really a challenge in the 5 minutes that I have to do this. And so it's going to be a pretty quick tour de horizon. This is a really complicated and diverse region, and it's kind of a political scientist's dream or nightmare, considering on where you sit in terms of regime types and types of political systems and types of partnerships that we have or lack thereof in the region. From everybody from struggling democracies in Indonesia, Malaysia, Timor-Leste, and the Philippines, to kind of electoral authoritarian regime in Singapore and Cambodia and increasingly Thailand. I would put in that category communist dictatorships that hold over from what many of us think is another century in Vietnam and Laos, but are functioning in very different ways and have diverged from each other quite dramatically in many ways. A sultanate in Brunei and a failed state in Burma. So you have literally the gamut there. And they're, most of them, except for Timor-Leste, bound up in this regional organization of ASEAN, which is, of generally not the most effective regional organization on the planet, and is still trying to develop institutions that allow it to work as a voice for the region, but increasingly insists on being recognized as that voice, and is being recognized by others outside of the region as the voice for that sub-region. You have a big neighbor in the form of the People's Republic of China that considers this region as part of its strategic space and acts accordingly, and in some cases considers big chunks of this region as part of its actual territory and acts accordingly. And this presents a problem for about half the countries in the region who have disputes on this with the PRC. And this creates both, again, challenges and opportunities for those of us who want to engage with these countries. Also, the Chinese party state has piloted a lot of its foreign policy and influence operations strategies in this region, and so we can learn a lot of lessons from how the PRC and the CCP operate in these states in its near abroad. So we could see from how they launched the Belt and Road activities and other political influence operations that they've carried out in many of these countries. And again, as I said, ASEAN has been particularly ineffective in dealing with the most serious challenges in the region, political challenges in the region, such as Burma, and is very internally divided, including on the issue of how to deal with the Chinese engagement, as well as engagement with the United States. So in this region, we also often find ourselves working at cross purposes with some of our closest regional partners from outside the sub-region, such as Japan, Taiwan, Korea, and even Australia and New Zealand, who are very active in this region and have greater proximity to it. Coming up over the next year and a half, we have a lot of political activity in the form of elections in Thailand, Indonesia, continued political flux in Malaysia, I think is a nice way of putting it, and elections in Timor-Leste. You have the ongoing, intensifying, increasingly brutal civil war in Burma, and generational transitions underway in places like Vietnam and Laos, with the old guard of communist leadership moving away and dying, as it were. And so you have a very dynamic and volatile, in some cases, political climate in the region that is increasingly looking authoritarian and less democratic. You have, this is a region where the democratic deficit and the democratic decline globally is very well felt. It is also a region that is made up of countries that are hedging and balancing the United States and China, and really, in many cases, trying to have it both ways, and seeing what they can get from both great powers that are assiduously competing in the region. And if I had to look at one common denominator across the region that we should think about as we go forward in the United States with our policy, I think that, to me, it is that none of these countries, despite how they often act sometimes in terms of their situational alliances with China or with the United States, none of them really wants to be a puppet of another country. They all want to maintain their sovereignty and their independence. I would also note that, in my experience, the U.S. does better when we treat these countries as having agency, not as a glob or as pieces on some geopolitical competition chessboard, but recognize that that's incredibly insulting to them, and that they really hate it when we do that, and that we treat them as places to play out this competition, but that it makes it, it hampers our democracy, our diplomacy. And the East-West Center, for instance, is a very powerful tool that allows us to differentiate and listen and really engage with these countries, not just one-on-one as countries, but with the people of these countries. As far as working with ASEAN, which is very challenging, we should when we can, but we should not let the lowest common denominator that often comes out of ASEAN limit our imagination in terms of how we engage with individual countries, and especially with our treaty allies, the Philippines and Thailand, because we do have very specific security relationships with them that we have to maintain within that framework. And finally, I would say that we need to do better on coordinating with our like-mindeds who are active in the region. At least, if we can't align, we should at least deconflict with them. And we need to emphasize the kind of engagement that reinforces that free and open Pacific that we seek to cultivate, where countries can maintain their sovereignty and their independence and develop develop their economies without coercion and dependency. So we need to meet them where they are and show them the value of U.S. engagement, and that's where the East-West Center really shines.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kelly. That's terrific.
Pass it over to Stilly.
Oh, no, actually, we're going to go first. We're not going to go to General Stilwell yet. We're just going to first hear from Senator Hilda Heine, who has a video recorded remarks for us, and then Governor Waihee will take up questions in the end. We'll first turn to Stilwell, General Stilwell, after these remarks.
I bring warm greetings of Yahweh from the Marshall Islands. While technology is able to connect us, I regret that I'm unable to join you all in person. I wish to express my gratitude to the organizers of this important panel for this opportunity to share some of my thoughts on the recent history and current state of play of U.S.-Pacific Islands relations. And thank you for your participation in this important dialogue. Let me preface my talk with you by saying that it is not my intention to paint a gloom and doom scenario of U.S.-Pacific Island relations. Rather, it is my intention to give an honest perspective from the standpoint of a Marshallese person looking out from within the Pacific Islands context. In the Pacific region, we're witnessing a contest of leadership, influence, and ideas, whereby success is ultimately demonstrated through the ability to set the political agenda, while also framing the rules and terms of compliance with that agenda. We saw this play out most recently in the Solomon Islands and with the August Act. It seems as if the U.S. is quote-unquote rediscovering the Pacific Islands after years of disinterest and neglect. This is progress. The fact is, the U.S. has been absent for almost 4 decades, 40 years in some Pacific Island countries. This is surprising to many Pacific observers, given the great loss of American lives in our region during the Second World War. In the heydays of the U.S.-Pacific engagement, the U.S. had Peace Corps volunteers engaged in many sectors at the national level in Pacific countries in areas such as education, health, trade, agriculture, and infrastructure development. But I believe U.S. Peace Corps volunteers were most effective at the local or community levels. Many of us recall our Peace Corps teachers living in rural areas, teaching at community schools, living under extremely basic conditions, often without electricity or running water. But these volunteers were dedicated and immersed themselves fully, becoming a part of their communities. Unsurprisingly, many married and have become part of the fabric of their local communities throughout our Pacific region. And I might add that many of these former Peace Corps volunteers continue to contribute positively to their respective local communities. Today, the reality is a stark contrast to the once vibrant and well-defined U.S. engagement policy in the Pacific region. We witnessed recently the United States scrambling to reopen an embassy it closed years ago as a countermeasure to Chinese strategic gains in the Solomon Islands. The same Solomon Islands that is home to important and hallowed places in the annals of the U.S. military history, such as Guadalcanal, Bloody Ridge, Iron Bottom Sound, and Henderson Airfield. Recently, we learned that the Solomon Islands government was refusing a U.S. Coast Guard cutter to berth in Honiara, its capital. And just offshore is Iron Bottom Sound, secured during World War II with the lives of many young American servicemen. What has happened to cause such a rift in U.S. Solomon Islands relationship? Those of us who are friends of the United States, and I must say there are still many of us in the region, were disappointed but not surprised. After decades of being ignored by the U.S., many Pacific Island governments started to forge new geopolitical and economic ties with new development partners. The People's Republic of China is one of these new development partners for Pacific countries. And while Washington had been disengaged in its Pacific policy, Beijing had put up an offensive charm in the greatest Pacific region. This is particularly true of the last 10 years. Beijing has been consistent and steadfast in cultivating Pacific diplomatic allies. Beijing had learned what mattered to Pacific Island governments and promoted policies that met the needs and aspirations of Pacific countries. Beijing had learned to be less judgmental in its interactions with Pacific leaders. But most especially, Beijing had learned to really listen to the needs and aspirations of the Pacific region. By contrast, Pacific countries view recent U.S. engagement in the region as being less consultative and more of a top-down approach. Most importantly, U.S. position in any Pacific Island country should be about the priorities of the given country and less about U.S. strategy of containment. Pacific leaders have voiced their concerns about the lack of consultations with respect to the Indo-Pacific strategy. And now, August, many Pacific leaders have characterized these geopolitical and security arrangements as a new brand of U.S. colonialism. The August framework, for instance, goes against the principles of the Rarotonga Treaty, of which Australia is a signatory. The treaty, signed in August 1985 and ratified a year later by 12 Pacific countries, bans the use, testing, and possession of nuclear weapons within the borders of the South Pacific Nuclear Free Zone. We must also remember that countries in our Pacific region have been adversely impacted by nuclear testing programs by metropolitan powers. These are deep-seated and real fears among the people of Kiribati, French Polynesia, and the Marshall Islands, where these nuclear tests were conducted. These fears and distrust are not about to go away anytime soon. The intersection between the nuclear legacy in the region and climate change calls for genuine commitment and leadership from the U.S. and its allies in the August Security Pact. The U.S., Australia, and other allies who want a free and secure Pacific region must work hard not only to provide climate leadership and financing, but also to address the long-lingering and unresolved nuclear legacy issues that continue to undermine U.S. Pacific Islands relations. China's presence and active engagement is indeed of concern to many Pacific leaders. President David Panuelo of the Federated States of Micronesia recently went public with his views and concerns over what he views as China's interference in national decision-making, not only in the FSM, but also the wider Pacific region. We must remember that China's presence in the region did not just happen overnight. Beijing has had a long-term strategic interest in the Pacific region. China's influence in the Pacific has gained a lot of traction, particularly in the last 10 years, because of the void left by the U.S. and our allies. Rather than America chasing China around the Pacific, may I suggest a different strategy? Not all strategic problems require the 7th Fleet Career Task Force or Marines pre-trained to land on Pacific Island beaches, or a quickly deployable 25th Infantry Division. Nor does it require an intervention like August at a reported cost of $368 billion that would be charged to the Australian taxpayers. The United States can start by listening, really listening to what's important from the point of view of Pacific countries. I'm talking about real consultations with your friends in the Pacific Islands region, not just plain loads of Washington VIPs flying in the diplomatic version of shock and awe, but real and concrete dialogue. The Chinese have figured this out and offered deals on supposed low-cost loans and other financial incentives for infrastructure projects. Many of us understand that there could be hidden costs, but the perception of Pacific countries is that Beijing listens to us when we talk about national priorities and needs. In its attempt to forge new relationships or revitalize old ones, U.S. seems out of touch and without any new and innovative ways to re-engage the region. At the forefront of U.S.'s re-engagement efforts in the region is the Peace Corps programs of over 50 years ago. Don't get me wrong, Peace Corps is a great program, but I know America can and should do better. I think the U.S. could be more innovative in its use of soft power as well. Last month, I walked around the University of the South Pacific campus in Suva, Fiji, a university owned by 12 Pacific Island countries. I noticed a Japanese-funded technology building, an Australian-funded lecture theater, and a Chinese institute. The absence of U.S. presence on the campus is noticeable. I think the U.S. could gain so much more goodwill by being more proactive and strategic with its assistance to premier regional institutions such as USB. I am delighted to see that positive steps are being taken by the U.S. to address policy shortcomings that may have contributed to strained relations between the United States and Pacific Island countries. The recent appointment of a presidential envoy to the Pacific Islands Forum is noted, but it remains to be seen how this appointment plays out. As a board member of the East-West Center, I'm extremely pleased to see the elevated role of the East-West Center on U.S. Pacific Islands initiatives, strengthening of the Pacific Islands Development Program, PIDP, and the introduction of the Residencies Pacific Islands Leadership Program, or RIPPLE. Inviting the East-West Center to moderate the Pacific Islands Conference of Leaders and participate in the White House Summit are positive movements long overdue. The publication of the East-West Center Pacific Matters for America and holding convenings on Pacific issues like the compact negotiation studies are steps in the right direction. These are most welcome. Additional resources earmarked for scholarships for Pacific Island students at East-West Center or other institutions in the Pacific could build upon these positive steps. I also think the U.S. needs to do more to attract students from the region to study in the United States. Future Pacific leaders must be educated in the U.S. tertiary institutions to ensure a strong link with America and support of U.S. interest in the region. As someone from the Marshall Islands, it would be remiss of me not to say a few words on the Compact of Free Association between the United States and the three freely associated states, Palau, the Federated States of Micronesia, and the Marshall Islands. The compacts underpin the relationship between the U.S. and the three compact states. Despite some issues of contention between parties, these treaty arrangements have, for the most part, been successful, with each party to the arrangements equally benefiting from them. As you know, negotiations are currently underway between the U.S. and the compact states to renew expiring provisions of the existing treaty arrangements. I understand that there has been criticism of U.S. approach to current compact talks. Despite unsettled issues, I am hearing that the compact states are being urged to accept terms to meet U.S. chosen otherwise. The U.S. may choose to ignore the issue, but it won't go away and will remain a forever stain in the U.S.-RMI relations. Similarly, the climate security challenge faced by all Pacific Island countries, but most critically by atoll countries like the Marshall Islands, is here to stay. As the largest cumulative contributors of greenhouse gases, the U.S. is obligated to assist with climate change and sea level rise impacts on low-lying atoll nations. Ignoring the issue in the compact talks or by any other means will not make the matter go away. I think the United States must and should use the compact talks to showcase its strength of generosity and goodwill to three of its staunchest allies and supporters. Thank you again for this opportunity to share some of my thoughts with you.
Well, thank you to Senator Heine for preparing those remarks and having the video available to us. I'm sorry she couldn't be here in person, but as I said, Governor Weihai is here to give us some further insights as we go through the Q&A section. Now my pleasure to introduce our former Assistant Secretary of State for East Asia and Pacific Affairs at the Department of State, General David Stillwell.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for the chance to be here and to comment. And let me just first comment on that last presentation is the way we understand each other better is when we have free conversations and we find where our overlapping interests are, and then we can have an open conversation about those differences. And so Senator Heine's presentation and President Panuelo's letter, I think, are both important places to have a conversation without emotion and productive, useful conversations, which is what the East-West Center does. It brings people together from across the region and to have these conversations. And you would be surprised at how much good comes from that. I won't claim to be good, but I'm a product of the East-West Center, like Representative Ward. I, too, met my wife at the East-West Center. And even though I was just come out of the Air Force Academy, was going on to serve for another 30 years in the military, I understood at a very early age the importance of what previous President Volstead calls peace fair. Not warfare, but peace fair. And this is where the East-West Center fills in that gap between hard power, which Senator Heine referred to, right, steaming the 7th Fleet through the region. There's a need for that. But really, there's a demand and a need for the other part. And so my time at the State Department as a diplomat showed me that. Many voices like Senator Heine's out there saying we would like more of the Americans out here, more of your, not money, but just attention and presence. And we have been distracted in the Middle East for 20 years. And with the departure from Afghanistan, I hope that, and I know that the U.S. Can now spend more attention in regions that really matter, following up on the idea of the rebalance in 2012, again, to get back to where we were at one point. Now, you ask yourself, what's the difference between then and now? Well, for the last 30 years, since the end of history in 1991, we really have not had a major existential threat, competitor, whatever you want to call it. Today, we acknowledge that there is, in fact, a threat that is such that we can no longer carry this burden all by ourselves, the United States. And so, as Senator Heine mentioned, for the last 30 years, we diplomats, if I can claim that, got very used to getting into national capitals and dictating terms and wagging our finger and telling people what they're doing right and wrong. When I was a lieutenant flying fighter aircraft early on, my flight lead would always say, hey, Stillwell, you got 2 ears and 1 mouth. You should use them in those proportions. And I would advise my diplomatic friends to do the same, is the more we go out into the region and listen, the more effective we can be. But the second part of that, and related to it, is through the last 30 years, we have looked at the security arrangements, and it's expanded and reflected in other aspects of U.S. diplomacy in terms of hub and spoke. It's a series of bilateral arrangements with the 5 allies, obviously, in the region, but also with partners and such. And what that does, if you looked at a model, in a hub and spoke arrangement, the U.S. fits very large in the center with very small spokes to the many other countries that we deal with. In the current network, when I worked for General Martin Dempsey as the chairman of Joint Chiefs, he talked about networks, alliance networks. The beautiful thing about those networks is there's all these lines that cross, and they can't touch the U.S. because now we have to get real small in the center and allow India and Japan to coordinate on things of joint and mutual interest. And there's many examples of those things in ASEAN and other places where The Americans have to be comfortable to sit back and listen, to allow our allies and partners and like-mindeds to take the lead. And we, as long as we are all moving in generally the same direction, accept the fact that we don't have to be out in front anymore, because many hands make light work. Not just us carrying the burden, as we just heard. It can't be just the U.S. You know, in the Pacific, Australia and New Zealand share interests in the region that we should leverage and take advantage of. So many hands make light work. More cooperation, more listening, and more networks, I think, are going to help us address the many issues that Senator Heine rightfully raised on that. The competition is not just in terms of largesse, buildings, infrastructure. It's a competition of values. You know, when I traveled through the region as Assistant Secretary, you'd be amazed at who our best diplomats of the United States were. It was our businesses. It was Hewlett-Packard in Singapore and Malaysia, you know, and other American economic interests and activities that send that message. When we travel to countries, we hire locals and we bring them in and we educate them and we send to American schools and they come back and we improve everybody. You know, rising tide floats all ships. The competition doesn't do that. And so I understand her point about they're visible and they're making promises, but trust me, look at the Cambodia and the Pakistan model and you will find it doesn't work. The promises don't, actually the reality doesn't live up to the promises. And so again, there's a bit of reality and clear speaking that needs to happen. I'll close with two thoughts. One, there are two bargains we just can't accept in this whole competition. The first one comes from the 2014 Shangri-La dialogue, where the headlines of the New Straits Times said, China for prosperity, America for security. That is not a bargain we can accept, right? And then the senator's points touched on that. So we can't accept that one. But the second bargain that nobody wants, to include Marshall Islands and other friends, is the Chinese proposal that we divide the Pacific at the East-West center, and America gets everything to the east and the PRC gets everything to the west. And there were people actually debating that suggestion for quite a while. No, we can't accept that. You know, as long as we're welcome in the region, as long as we have shared values, allies and partners, I believe we should continue, and we should continue to compete. We're at our best when we compete. And again, we should continue to talk as we're doing here. And I'll conclude with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, We have about 15 minutes for Q&A from the floor. And as we do that, I just want to raise three themes that I know some folks are eating, so just give you a second to eat and think. Three big themes, right? We heard one theme was about the common denominator across the region is a desire for independence and sovereignty. Many of them are post-colonial states. Many of them are emerging out of 1945 and sort of finding a footing in a very different international environment. The second theme was about the contest for leadership and for ideas, rules, even values. So that's the second big theme that emerges from these three presentations. And the third was the role of allies and partners, that we can't do everything, that we have to have networks and string together these new alliances, whether they be Quad and AUKUS. So one thing I want to just plant as an initial thing that I hope you'll come back to in your comments, not necessarily that you have to answer right now, because we'll take some additional comments and questions from the floor, is how do we calibrate that? Because they're intrinsically, it's not conflictual, but they're at least, they require calibration and careful. AUKUS is one way we can improve partnerships in the region, but creates, as Senator Heine mentioned, some comments. We can support independence and sovereignty, but there are red lines for us, right? About values, about what's claimed by other contestants, et cetera. So how do we calibrate that? And I can't help but ask, in my role as East West Center, here in this place in the Congress, so lots of discussions, lots of bills, lots of appropriations, discussions about various issues. But really, for this new environment that you've described, these three big themes, what are the kinds of things that a place like the East-West Center can most advance in terms of our interests in the region and make them explicable to Americans who vote and who are part of our system? How do we make it real to them to say, this matters to you, what we do in the region? that what we do and don't do hits home. So let me plant those as big themes and big issues, and then I'd like to invite the floor to offer any questions, comments. Please do not be shy. Ground rules are very simple. Remember, we are on the record and live streaming, but just identify yourself and your affiliation if you wish, and pose a question or comment. Who's going to lead off? Yes, Ambassador Piper Campbell. Please introduce yourself anyways. I happen to know you, but others should.
Hi, Piper Campbell, former ambassador to ASEAN and currently at American University. I'm happy to have some of my students in the room as well. My question is a bit following on Satu's, and it's a little bit in this space of thinking about leadership and thinking about partnerships. When the United States is in a leading position, we set the agenda, and folks, and the expectation is that that agenda is going to be aligned with U.S. interests. When we're in a partnership, there is inevitably a negotiation of the direction. And I think that Senator Heine's discussion kind of framed some of the key areas where there is not currently alignment between the U.S.'s sense of the problem or the U.S.'s sense of how we move forward from where we are. And so as we think about partnerships being innately different from the U.S. sets the agenda and everybody follows, how do we shift a communication, including a domestic communication, about needing to change some of the goals and interests?
Wonderful. I think all three of our presenters would love to weigh in on this. Governor first.
Thank you.
In case they didn't hear
Okay, so the question revolves around setting interests and agenda, and whether it's the U.S. taking the lead and then having others adapt their interest to ours, or whether we make it a negotiation and then subsuming some of our interests to those of our partners now.
Is that clear? Yeah, I think though, first of all, before I answer the question, the fact that you are meeting to even discuss these issues underscores the determination, the underlying determination to somehow get their interests together. Having said that, obviously, when people come from different sovereignties, they have different perspectives as to what they would like to see for their own best interests. And one of the roles of the East-West Center, and I think one of our most important roles, obviously, is to get these kinds of discussions, even pre-agenda setting, get those kinds of discussions frankly talked out. And if there's any value at all, it's the idea that if you can create a forum that's friendly, that's truthful, that you actually can get someplace. One of the problems with diplomacy, I think, especially in the Pacific, is the idea that when we meet, we already need to leave. And so we don't lay a foundation for really true discussion. So I think, as long as you have different countries meeting, the point I'm trying to make is you're going to always have people that have different ways of looking at the same thing. What's really telling is how we support the underlying desire to finally agree on something.
I'll add one sentence. The big challenge is, as the U.S. is a global power, and we're talking regional issues, and it's making those priorities, and that's really difficult.
And further to that, we're completely wrapped around Ukraine right now. It is sucking a lot of the policy air out of the room, and it makes it hard to even deal with the headline issue of competition with the PRC, let alone the lower kind of level way we do that. I will say, though, as a framing way to think about it, is you can't beat something with nothing. And right now, when I think about what our approach looks like, whether it's in Southeast Asia or the Pacific or in Latin America or Africa, in all the places where we are thinking, oh, now we've got to compete with China, we can't just go in and do things the way we've always done. We're also in our own country dealing with basically walking away from 40 years of economic globalization policy, World Trade Organization, trade policy, and economic policy on a bipartisan basis, but we certainly don't have we've agreed on a bipartisan basis to walk away from that, but we haven't agreed yet on what comes next. And so when I talk about you can't beat something with nothing, when we go out and start, economic engagement with these countries, we don't even know how to do that anymore because we don't even know what we want from the world globally and how we want to trade and engage economically. We're focused on supply chain resilience and looking at countries in terms of how they can serve our interests on that. And that can be a useful way to start a conversation, but it certainly can't be the end-all be-all of how we deal with countries. And again, looking at all these countries as, oh, how can we instrumentalize you in our great power competition? If we start from that place, which is pretty much where we are right now, it is not going to work because we can't. The other thing we can't do, in addition to not being able to beat something with nothing, is we can't win a race to the bottom with China. They will always out PRC and CCP us. They will always beat us at their game. We are terrible at playing their game. And so we have to find either a different game to play or, well, actually that's the only way we can is finding a different game to play or play, or force them to play by different rules. And so we've got to think about how high standard development, this is what, listening, yes, partnerships that are real. Chinese partnerships, party-state partnerships in these countries tend to be quite extractive, notwithstanding what Senator Heine says about, they listen, they give us what we want. They give what they hear elite people in those countries asking for, and it often comes wrapped up in a big, package of corruption and lots of, rule breaking on the back end, environmental destruction, loss of rights on the ground for workers and communities. And so I think that, again, we have experience doing development different and better. We have partnerships like the East and tools like the East-West Center that can help us engage these communities in a completely different way, a much more meaningful way that allows us to be not just successful in the short term kind of, are we putting up points on the board with China, which is how too much of Washington thinks about this. And it's a really zero-sum and silly mentality that it drives me crazy every time I hear people talking about it this way. But we've got to really think, where are we building those deeper kinds of and making those values arguments not through what we say but through how we do and what we do and who we work with on the ground.
Yeah, and I'm really glad, Kelly, that you brought up the issue of the economic element because it is a huge element of these partnerships, Piper. And of course, as you know, China is included in the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership with many of our allies and partners. And if people may dismiss it as low standard, but it is a tool. And China's on deck to join CPTPP, whether it happens anytime soon or in some years or never. The point is, it's a prospect and we're not even at that discussion table. So that does frame partnerships. I do see a hand from Cleo Pascal. Could you introduce yourself, please? And you're gonna have to speak up loud and maybe we'll
point.
Sorry, Cleo Pascal, Foundation for Defense of Democracies. It's actually just a quick technical question. No question the nuclear testing legacy is horrific and ongoing. Question about the Rarotonga Treaty in AUKUS. From what I understood, Rarotonga has to do with nuclear weapons, not nuclear propulsion. And so just a point of clarification, is Rarotonga relevant for AUKUS?
I don't have the text in front of me, so
No, absolutely not. It conflates nuclear power with nuclear weapons. Those are not in any way. I mean, Australia has a nuclear power plant. It's in the region, but it's using for peaceful purposes. And if you want to talk climate, you have to talk nuclear. So, I mean, we need to have a clear discussion of what we're talking about.
Yeah, and that's one of the issues. In fact, this whole era may be a blessing in disguise because what we need to talk about is the PRC and what they're doing in the region. And to a certain extent, what they're doing in the region is opening our eyes up. And so, when we're looking at even our defense worldwide global expansion, we're still focusing, turning to the other direction instead of looking at Asia or looking at China in a more realistic way. And so I know we're running out of time, and I would like another question, but
Yeah.
I just want to reinforce the idea.
We'll take one more from our former young professional in the East-West Center in Washington, who's just about, I'm happy to say, about to start a PhD at University of Hawaii Manoa as an East-West Center affiliate. So I can't help but privilege you, Ryan. Over to you. Please
Yeah,
introduce yourself.
that's much more of an introduction I was thinking. Hi, Ryan, pleasure. Thank you guys so much for your statements today. I wanted to reflect on something that Senator Heine said, something that you guys said about this setting of our policy moving forward. I wonder how much we can move forward given that we still have these power statuses in place that have not changed from those 40 years ago. The status of Guam as an unincorporated territory, the status of these SCOFA agreements, and the unchanging manner of how we want those negotiations to go are not just a series of neglect and not being present. It is forcing our presence without any change afterwards. If we're having a discussion about how we can move forward, is there any way of doing that while we have not had any change in the status, in the socio-political power, in the places where we have made it very clear where our voice has to be heard and not utilized it and seen the decay that happens after nearly half a century without any investment further?
Let me just offer one point. In any negotiation, you have to take the other side's position. You have to understand what the other side's interests are. You just can't sit there and express your own interests and expect the other side to meet them, right? If you're going to come to a conclusion, you have to take both sides, and that's where we need to be on some of these.
Governor, did you have any? Oh, yes. Sorry.
That's okay.
I have a comment. Ditto.
Listen, I'm very sorry, but we do have to have a hard stop because this room has to be prepared for the next session, and I don't want to be holding.
Going by that clock. It's
May I interrupt your hard stop? Something I promised Speaker Psyche that I would send greetings to you from the House of Representatives. Speaker Psyche said best regards to you. And now, one other thing, if everybody wants to be like Ryan, see us for an application to come to the East Center.
On your tables are links via, the ever-present QR code to a variety of publications, fellowships, opportunities, programs. And if you're not already on our list, newsletter list or recipient list, please consider being. We can't place you on it, but if you go to the website, very easy to do, and please give us your name and what you're interested in and which programs you're interested in. We'd be happy to place you. Please join me in thanking in absentia Senator Heine and, of course, our terrific panel. Thank you for coming, and please don't leave lots of food on the table. So please eat up and
help us clean up.
yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you.